Welcome once again to Community Christian Church. My name is Nick Cox, and I'm glad to be here today. Allow me to introduce myself if we haven't had the chance to meet before, so you can have some idea of who I am, my background, some idea of the training I had. I mean, if there's going to be some guy up here talking to you for a half an hour, you probably should get a little idea of who they are. I grew up right down the road in Hamilton, so I'm a local kid. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Rebecca. I have 3 kids, 12, almost 10 and 7. I went to the University of Maryland for my undergrad, so go Terps. I have 2 master's degrees. We're from a little school in Tennessee, and the degree is called a Master's of Divinity, which is this super pretentious sounding degree, but mostly it's just a degree in Christian religious studies. I have a second master's degree from Messiah College up in Pennsylvania in marriage and family counseling. I'm a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist with the state of Maryland. My day job is to work with individuals, families, and couples to help them be as healthy as possible and to have relationships that are as healthy as possible. I've been doing that for the last 11 or 12 years or so. Before that, I was on staff here at Community Christian Church for about 7 years before leaving to do counseling full time. I think there's a lot of people who are curious about what counseling is like or have some specific questions about some areas of their lives. There's some questions or concerns that people have just on a regular basis. So I've condensed some of the most common questions I get down so that we can have a conversation today about some of those frequently questions that I get as a counselor. A couple of brief disclaimers before we really get rolling. First, I am not offering medical advice or mental health advice. I'm not your therapist. This is not a setting for therapeutic interventions or confidential conversations. I don't know the circumstances of your life, and when I'm counseling with someone, it needs to be a private conversation. This is not. Most of the time, I get to ask questions and get more information to make sure that I'm addressing specific things dealing with their situation in their life. Here, not so much. What I do hope to offer is a different perspective to some common questions, concerns, problems that people struggle with in their lives, especially for those who have faith in Jesus as a significant part of their lives. Look, we hope this is a really helpful thing, that this is the point of why we're having this conversation. The only reason, if we're being honest, that I'm here today is with the hope that it's really, really helpful. But if you need more direct help, if you're struggling with something that really needs an individual conversation or a private conversation, I hope you'll seek that help for yourself in an appropriate way. Second, my answers are going to be by necessity kind of broad, kind of general, and pretty brief, unless you want to sit here all day. And heaven knows I don't mind talking. I could easily go on and have at times for hours about each of these questions, but we're going to keep it a little bit shorter today. Besides, Dave's not up here, so who wants the long, drawn-out message anyhow? Lastly, I want to make sure that I'm crystal clear that I struggle with all these things as much as anyone else. I'm not pretending that I have this solved or that I have all the answers. I'm a hypocrite in that I don't take my own advice sometimes, and I'm attempting to grow and develop to be more and more who God has me to be. And sometimes when people hear that I'm a therapist, they'll say something like, "Oh, you must have a perfect marriage." I don't. I think I got a really good one, and my wife and I, we work at it, but that is by no means perfect. And if you're curious, you can ask my wife just about how organized I am not. Nor am I the perfect father. I got lots of stories that can make it really, really clear in that point. In fact, I'm not perfect at anything. So when I'm talking about things, I'm talking about it in the same way that I need to hear it. All these things I need to be reminded of as well. All right, so I think we're on the same page as we get started this morning. And so what I'd like to do as we really get rolling is just say a real brief prayer for us as we get started. God, I pray that you watch over us, that you keep us soft to your message, that you can keep our hearts in your hands so that we can move where you need us to move. I pray that you will walk alongside us and that you will stir us and bring something to our attention today so that we can take a step closer to you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Oh, amen. All right, so let's dive on in, shall we? All right, so one question I get on a regular basis is about people who experience kind of emotions, namely emotions that are really intense or really high. For some people, there are times when emotions seem to be just almost overwhelming, whether it's with anger or with intensity or with sadness or with loneliness. And the question I get frequently is, what do you do with these kinds of emotions? I mean, how do I deal with strong emotions? One of the first things that people often struggle with is that they aren't honest about what they're experiencing because they haven't been given the message that their emotions aren't something that can be addressed at all, or maybe their emotions are something that needs to be ignored, or maybe their just emotions is something that they just don't want to pay attention to. One of the first things we need to realize is that emotions aren't good or bad. Emotions just are. Some of our emotions are more comfortable than others. Some are more familiar. Some are more socially acceptable. But the reality is that emotions are just part of the human experience. I don't think we often think about it this way. Let me ask you this. Is pain good or bad? Now, I think our knee-jerk reaction to that would be to say, yeah, of course, pain is bad. But the reality is that pain is not good or bad. Pain is your body's way of drawing your attention to something that is not the way it is supposed to be. In fact, if we lose the ability to experience pain, it's kind of a catastrophe for our bodies. Leprosy is a disorder that affects our nerves, and it can eliminate our ability to experience pain. And Dr. Paul Brand, he was a doctor who worked with leprosy patients in India for decades back in the late 1900s, in an area where it was really still a very strong stigma for leprosy. And Dr. Brand, he once wrote about a time when he was working with a patient who had a very advanced form of leprosy in his legs. And as this patient walked away from the doctor's office, the man twisted his foot all the way down to his ankle. And he didn't even stumble. He just kept walking on his ankle bone. And I don't know about you, that sends a shiver through me because, man, for all of us, when we twist our ankle even just a little bit, the brief flare of pain, it shuts our leg down and we stumble or we fall to reduce the damage. If we didn't have any pain, we might just keep on going without any recognition that something is wrong. There's something that needs our attention. There's something that needs to be addressed because it's not working right and it's going to cause more damage. I think emotionally, we can do the exact same thing at times. Our emotions are telling us something's wrong. It's firing off these kind of warning signs, just as surely as pain can fire off warning signs for our physical body. So one of the things we need to get really good at when it comes to our emotions is to be honest with what we're experiencing. Not what we want to experience, not what we think we should be experiencing. What are we actually experiencing? Because if we can be really honest with ourselves about what we're experiencing, then we might be able to ask what those emotions are trying to tell us. The way Proverbs in the Bible puts it is this way. The purpose in a man's heart is like a deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. That's exactly what we're trying to do here when it comes to our emotions. And one of the big emotions that I think we can use as an example for this is anger. Anger is a big one for this. I think a lot of people act as if anger is always and inherently bad or evil or it needs to be ignored at all costs. No. Anger is just like pain. It's pointing towards something that's not the way it should be. What are your emotions pointing at? What are you experiencing? Because here's the reality. Our emotions are powerful and they can steer our behaviors. They can steer our perceptions, how we react to situations. But if we're pretending like we don't have any emotions, if we're pretending like we're not angry, we're pretending like we're not sad or we're not lonely, those emotions can influence us and push us and pull us, and we might not even know it. This is about working onto this deeper level of self-awareness in ourselves, which lets us address our emotions and our pains in ways that are healthy and that are in line with our faith and in line with who God's calling us to be. Your emotions, your anger, or your sadness, it is not the enemy. It is something God has created in us to point our attention towards something that we need to pay attention to. On the other hand, your emotions are not a license to do whatever you choose to do or a blank check to react however you want or to treat people however. No. They're like dashboard lights in our lives at times. Think about the dashboard lights in your car, right? There's a handful of them, right? Like there's the low gas or the battery light. There's a check engine light or low oil or tire pressure, right? I'm sure fancy new cars have a whole bunch more lights that I'm not even aware of. Now, does the dashboard light on your car mean your car is broken? No, not really, but it means that you probably should pull over and check. Look, it might just be of a loose gas cap, but it'd be foolish not to slow down, pull over, check it out. Same thing with us. Your emotions and mine are invitations to recognize that we might need to slow down, metaphorically kind of pulling the car over and check what's going on. This is an area where I think writing stuff down can be really helpful. Writing down what you're feeling, what stirred you up, what your emotions are drifting toward, what are you thinking? All this is a focus to slow us down, take a breath, and make sure we aren't just ignoring what we're experiencing. Let me give an example of how this might work. Imagine that you're paying attention to your anger. So at the end of every day, you prayerfully and thoughtfully kind of think through your day and you ask yourself, when was I experiencing anger? And you just kind of write those times down. What was I experiencing in those moments? What was I thinking? What stirred that up in me? What might it be pointing toward? Look, these short questions can really give us some traction to know more about ourselves and our emotions. All right, on to the next question. Here's another one I get all the time. Is how do I make better choices? Okay, let's be honest. No one actually asked that question directly. Most people don't wander into my office and say, Nick, it's great to meet you. I really stink at making choices. But if we're honest, there are lots of people who might need to pay a little bit more attention to how their choices are made in their lives. If we slow down and think about it, the ability to make good choices is sort of an essential skill of living a good life, right? So when it comes down to how to make good choices, for me, an analogy I sometimes use is thinking about it in kind of a different picture, like an exclusive nightclub or like a restaurant. You know, those fancy pants kind of places where there's like the velvet ropes and there's like a bouncer at the door with like a clipboard and he's checking off names. You know, the type of place I've never been to before. I mean, I've seen them in movies, so I don't actually know they exist. I figure they might exist. Picture a place like that. The idea is this. Is that if a choice can get past the bouncers in the front of the door and into the building, then there's a whole lot of freedom in how to make those choices. There's a freedom in what that means for your life. If a choice cannot get past the bouncer, well, not so much. And I think there's two bouncers at the door. There's two bouncers I'd like to draw your attention to. And if your choice is going to clear these bouncers, then you're good to go. Right? And so here, the two bouncers are this. Is my choice in line with my beliefs? And is my choice in line with my goals? Right? Good decision making, I think, really comes down to the ability to ask ourselves good questions before we make a choice so we can evaluate whether that choice fits into our lives, fits into the understanding of ourselves and the ramifications of those decisions. So the two bouncers at the door, they're going to be, your decisions need to clear both of those. So let's talk about each of those. The first one is about whether the choice is in line with your beliefs. Now, in terms of beliefs here, I'm kind of using this very broadly. Of course, it includes our beliefs in our faith, but also includes beliefs about ourselves or our world or our relationship, which, if you're a follower of Jesus, is all covered under that idea of our religious beliefs. Yet the simple reality is that if you are making a choice that runs counter or contrary to your beliefs, at some point, that choice will not fit. And it's going to require you to either shift your beliefs or that choice itself is going to crack and fail. If you find yourself making choices that run counter to your beliefs, you will most likely find those choices failing. Right? The second bouncer at the door is, are these choices in line with my goals? Who you are, who you're becoming is a vital piece of how you're making choices. Because the reality is the decisions we make move us in one direction or another. If we make choices that move us away from our goals, then we will ultimately have two options available: to backtrack to our goals or to give up our goals altogether. Think about it this way. Pretend you and your family decide that you're going to pack up for a road trip to Disney World, right? Happiest place on the earth where you spend way too much money. And so you decide, you know what? After we're done watching this, let's get in the car, pack it up, we're heading to Disney World. And it doesn't matter if you take a luxury sports car or a beat-up old minivan. It doesn't matter if you use a GPS or a old folded-up paper map. If you take highways or back roads, you won't get to Disney if you pull out of your parking lot from here and head north. Why is that, you ask? Because Florida is south. And if you start heading away from the goal, then you're not going to end up at your goal. The only option is to change your goal and be like, well, can't go to Disney, but how about we go to Canada instead? And it's like, well, that was not what we were planning. Or you can backtrack and retrack all those miles to head back down to Florida again. Look, the book of Proverbs, it puts it this way. The wisdom of the wise keeps his life on track. The foolishness of fool land them in a ditch. So here's the reality. Two bouncers. Are your choices in line with your beliefs? Are your choices in line with your goals? Which means, of course, you need to spend some time figuring out what your beliefs and goals are in the first place, right? Why do you think we talk around here so much about learning more about who God is, what he longs for in our life, about faith and belief and how that plays out in our lives? Because it matters if you want to hold on to your beliefs and setting good goals in your life when it comes to the choices we make. It doesn't guarantee that you're always going to have the right choice or there's always going to be kind of a perfect outcome that you're hoping for. Of course not. But I think that even if a choice doesn't go the way we hope, most of us can sleep at night with a sense of peace if we know we are choosing in line with our beliefs and our goals. All right, next question. What is one tip or suggestion to really help us have a great marriage? Now, look, there are libraries full of books on this topic, and you can spend the rest of your life devoting yourself to just answering this one question. So know right from the top that any response I give here is going to be brief and probably super overly simplistic. But I've been sitting across from couples for over a decade, and you start to see some patterns between people, patterns between couples that are healthy and thriving, and also between ones that are struggling. And look, there's so many skills that people can develop, from how they communicate to how they use conflict, how they express their love and care for each other. And these skills are essential to healthy relationships. But I sometimes think we can skip a step. I'm in the process of trying to overseed my lawn, right? Last winter, like half my lawn died and I have no idea why. So what you do with overseeding is you basically put seeds on top of a lawn that already exists so you can get more grass. And so I've been doing all kinds of reading about that and get myself ready for it. And so I got a dethatcher, and I've dethatched my lawn, and which is basically like this power broom thing, and it sweeps up all the dead mowed grass and debris. And I've been like raking out the lawn and raking it out. And then I got all the seeds, and I've been walking around trying to like spread all the seeds around. And then I got all these hoses and sprinklers so I can like water my lawn. Like, right? I mean, like, cause apparently you got to water these suckers like crazy for them to grow. What you have to do primarily when you're overseeding your lawn is you got to create an environment where growth is really, really possible, right? Like, you can't guarantee growth, but you have to create an environment where growth is really possible. It really has a chance to flourish. I think marriages are the same way. They need to exist in an environment where growth is more possible. And there are a few ingredients that I think can help us. And I swear to you, I did not mean for all these to start with the letter G, right? So I was writing this down, and by the time I look back to it, they all start with the letter G. And that was not on purpose. I was not trying to be cute, but they all start with the letter G. All right. So one ingredient of a healthy environment where marriage can grow is gentleness. I think this might be one of the most underrated virtues in our lives. Right? In the Bible, it talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Actually, Joe talked about it last week, right? So we read about the fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Right? Last week, Joe mentioned that, right? And you got gentleness kind of tucked in there right between faithfulness and self-control. The reality is that people who are gentle toward each other, who slow down, who take it easy on people, they're much more likely to listen well. To not stick their foot in their mouth, to not have to be proven right, to not get into silly arguments about meaningless things. I think all of us know what it's like to be around someone who is just honestly gentle. It's such a safe and reassuring place, isn't it? And most relationships would benefit greatly from having large doses of gentleness just kind of injected into them. And so there might be a need for some moments to really decide between, am I going to be gentle or am I going to be sharp? And I hope you guys always choose gentle with your spouse. Second ingredient is gratitude. Gratitude and appreciation and acknowledgement. And these are life-giving. And I've spoken about this before, so I don't want to kind of belabor the point. But if you want to see a relationship that is in a great spot, look for people who regularly and honestly offer each other gratitude. It can be so deeply encouraging within a relationship. The third one is a genuine sense of curiosity. I'm not sure that's what everyone expects, but this one can slip by us, because for most people, relationships begin with a high dose of curiosity. Is this a person I'd like to be connected to? Is this a person I enjoy? Do we see things the same way? Could I see myself spending my life with this person? There's this curiosity. But that sense of curiosity can fall off, and it can fall off quickly. And then, without even realizing it, we can stop caring about what the other person is experiencing, or what they're thinking, or what they're feeling, or even what their life is like. We can stop asking, whether it's because we falsely think we already know the answer, or because we're so busy that we forgot, or if we're being more cynical, because we really just don't really care anymore. But the relationship will suffer for it, because once we stop being curious, we tend to stop connecting. How curious are you about what your spouse thinks, how they feel, what they're experiencing in their lives? If you're not great at this, pull up some like old Newlywed Game questions or something like that. Because it's not about the questions. The questions aren't important. What it is the desire to be curious about the other person in a real way, not an artificial way. There's a verse in the Bible that you've probably heard before. It says this: "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry." And here's the deal. If you are gentle, grateful, and genuinely curious, you will have a chance at this. But if you're sharp, self-focused and closed off, you don't have a snowball's chance in Hades. If we can manage our marriages by these characteristics, by have this great level of gentleness and gratefulness and genuine curiousness in the relationships, it will be soil that relationships can grow. All right, another question that circles around is, are DC movies so much worse than Marvel movies because you think Marvel just has better characters? And I gotta say, I don't think that's the case because DC has some phenomenal characters. They have some of the best characters that I've ever seen before. So Superman and Batman are fantastic characters, but here's the problem. I think Zack Snyder, who's the director of many of the DC movies, doesn't understand his own characters. He makes Batman this dark, brooding figure who is so much more content to beat people up and to shoot things. By the way, Batman doesn't use guns, but to shoot people as opposed to saving people instead of solving things and protecting people. Batman is a protector, but he is not projected as a protector. And then he creates Superman as this person who stands above everyone else, this superior figure. Superman is Clark Kent. He was raised as a farm boy in Kansas. He does not see himself as above people. He sees himself as among people. And these characters inherently, Superman and Batman, who are these key characters of the DC universe, are not relatable at all. On the other hand, you look at Marvel movies and you have characters like Iron Man, who is arrogant and he is flawed, but he is just so engaging. And you see Spider-Man, who's this lovable loser of a dork who's trying to stop the supervillains, but he's also just trying to talk to a girl he has a crush on. And these characters connect with us. I don't think it's that DC has worse characters than Marvel. I think DC has just done a poor job with their characters. All right, so next question. One question I think, I've been getting this question a lot more in the past year, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years than before, is this. How do I get along with family or friends who have very different beliefs or views or ideologies or perspectives than I do? I think we all know that we live in a world that is fractured. We live in a country that can sometimes feel really divided more than any of us wants and for all kinds of reasons. But what do we do when the person sitting across the table from us or on the other side of the phone line from us or the neighbor that's across the street, what happens when we feel like there's this diametrically opposed kind of stance from each other? Whether it's a political stance or a religious belief or how we see the world, there are lots of ways that we can feel disconnected. This becomes even more pointed when the person that we are at odds with is a person that we love. It's an interesting thing to love a person and to care about a person while simultaneously deeply and sharply disagreeing with that person. And again, this is something a dozen dissertations can be written on, but I'd love to offer just a few thoughts if I can. One of the things we need to remember is that the person we are disagreeing with is a person. Yes, I know that's a really dumb sentence to say out loud, and I'm going to say it again. The person you're disagreeing with is a person. And this sometimes can get lost a little bit in the shuffle when we stop seeing the person as an individual and instead we start seeing them as a representation of something we disagree with. It's something that happens all the times with humans and their interactions with each other is that we can kind of run with this temptation to treat people not like a person, but as a set of ideas. They are not. They are a person. And Jesus came to love and save people, the very people you disagree with. Another analogy. Have I told you before I like analogies? I like analogies. Another analogy, and this one might ruffle some feathers. I was an undergraduate student at the University of Maryland, and University of Maryland gets students from all over the place. And a good bit of them are actually from Philadelphia. And I had a good friend at college from Philadelphia, and we used to joke around, and I used to say to him, you know what I've come to realize? A Philadelphia sports fan is normally great, but Philadelphia sport fans are the worst. Right? Like you're a sports fan and you're a Philadelphia sports fan and you're fine. But man, you guys as like a collection of people are like the nameless, faceless mob of Philadelphia fans. You guys are the worst. And sometimes you throw snowballs at Santa, right? The people you disagree with are people. Don't forget that. And this is one of the reasons why social media can increasingly be dangerous because it strips away the person-to-person contact and it makes it so much easier to view a person not as an individual, but as part of a broader collective for which we stand against. And as soon as that happens, it is so much harder to show compassion and understanding and have a real conversation. It is not a weakness to communicate with someone in gentleness and curiosity, those two words again, and to approach a person with a sense of humility, even someone with whom we really disagree. It doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you're swayed. What it means is that you're connecting with a person in a real way. Jesus, as usual, gives us a really good example of this. Jesus reserved his harshest criticisms not for the people for whom he disagreed with ideologically or politically or religiously. In fact, he seemed to get along with those folks just fine. He developed a reputation for hanging out with those people. Nope. The people Jesus reserved his sharpest criticism for were religious folks who stopped listening to God and instead condemned the people around them who didn't agree with them or meet their standards. I think we need to be specifically careful here, you and I, because Jesus refused to give up the individual for the sake of winning an argument against the foe. In the Bible, we read about this moment in Jesus' life where he's teaching, and this is what we read. To those who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable, right? So think about who he's telling this parable to. Righteous people who look down on other people. This is what he says. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up at heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you, this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. It's pretty clear who Jesus is holding up as the hero of the story. Not the person who is convinced they are right. Not the person who's looking down on others, but the person with humility. So just a thought. What would it look like to attempt a really humble posture with people that you disagree with? Humility is not often something that we aim at very much in our culture, particularly in the midst of disagreements. But what would it look like if we began asking ourselves some question like, I wonder what this is like for them. I wonder how they developed this idea. I wonder what this means for their life. I wonder. And I'm not saying that there's never a time to respond, but if we ask honest questions that are actually curious about an answer, we'll be interacting with a real person, not some faceless group. And if you disagree, if you have a different idea, if you've drawn a different conclusion, ask them if they're open to hear it. Is that something that you'd be open to talk about? Is that something you'd be willing to speak with me about? If the answer is no, then don't say it. They're not in a place to receive it anyhow. So you would be just arguing against the wind. At the end of the day, this is about connecting with people in such a way that they can grow and we can grow more into who God wants us to be. Or is this just about winning an argument and being the loudest and being right? So ask them about their availability for the conversation. All right, one more question. Last one here. How do I begin to break a habit in my life? I think this is a really good question that's much deeper and more complicated than it looks on the surface. Whether we're talking about kind of a nuanced behavior that we wish could stop, or whether it's something that's more into the realm of addictions, people can frequently struggle to alter patterns in their lives. And I am by no means pretending that listening to me for 5 minutes is going to take the place of addiction counseling or treatment, right? No, if you're struggling with something like addiction, I hope you will get the appropriate help. But perhaps I can help you understand just a little bit about what tends to go into addressing and ultimately attempting to interrupt the pattern in our lives. Human behavior is often, if not always, driven by our needs. We have a desire, whether we are aware of it or not, to meet our needs. And this can happen in ways that are sometimes unhealthy or incomplete or unsustainable, but it is still a very subtle motive in a lot of our lives. And needs, they start in a really healthy place because of how God has wired us. God has created us with these needs because it helps us move closer to Him and closer to people around us in our lives. The need for connection, the need for adventure, the need for purpose, the need for satisfaction, the need for joy and pleasure, the need for acceptance, the need to rest, and the need for relief. These are real and healthy needs in our lives. Unfortunately, habits tend to form when these human needs are met in incomplete or inadequate ways with tools that were never meant to do so. Last analogy of the day, I promise. But let's pretend you're locked out of your house. So you've checked all the doors, you've checked all the windows, and it is locked shut. But you did find an old, rusty, flathead screwdriver in the lawn. And so you decide you're going to pull your best MacGyver and you're going to pick the lock, even though you have no idea what you're doing. And so you wriggle the screwdriver around, and after some time, you actually are able to get the door open. But then you notice the screwdriver is kind of bent and the door's lock is all mangled up. But you're inside, and so that need was satisfied, at least for the time being. But the lock doesn't look like it's going to work anymore. So the next day you get home and you have your key. Didn't forget my key today, except it turns out when you go to use your key, it doesn't fit in the lock anymore. The lock's been bent out of shape. It won't take the key anymore. You try, but the intended tool doesn't seem to work. And so you get that same old rusty screwdriver you used yesterday and you shimmy it open once again and you bend the lock even more in the process. Except now you're almost guaranteed that you're going to have to replace the lock, or you're going to have to keep using that old screwdriver again and again and again on that damaged door. This is how habits work. Whether it's eating or video games or social media or our phones or the small distractions and diversions of our lives, these things in and of themselves might be fine, but they were never intended to be the tools that we use to find fulfillment or a sense of success or a sense of restfulness or intimacy. You see, when we use a tool that was not meant to meet a need, it can change how we interact with that need in the first place. It can change how hard it is to meet that need within ourselves. If you find yourself in a pattern that isn't working, one of the things I'll hope you do is to ask, what need is this behavior attempting to meet? Let's take video games just kind of as an example, right? Let's say you or someone you love is engaging in video games in a way that feels excessive and feels that it's kind of a way that's disruptive to their life. Well, there might be 100 reasons why this is the case, but it matters that we know what need is being attempted to be satisfied with video games. Are they seeking fulfillment? Perhaps they don't feel very strong and fulfilled in other areas of your lives. And so the video games, it gives them an opportunity to be competitive and to excel, and gaming is a very satisfying sense of accomplishment. Perhaps video games is a way for a person to interact with other people. It's this social interaction, and it pushes some of the loneliness back into the shadows. Or maybe they're just bored. And maybe they're bored all the time. And this is one of the things that gives their life just a little bit of a sense of significance, a little bit of a sense of fun, a little bit of a sense of meaning. Maybe the leveling up and accomplishments in a game can feel gratifying because maybe they don't feel like there's much leveling up or accomplishments outside of the game. We could go on, but I think you get the point. We read this in Psalm 26:2, when the writer calls out to God, "Test me, Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and mind." The reality is, if we are to be loosening the grip of habits in our lives, then we need to invite God to help us discover what needs are being attempted to be met with those habits, and finding God-honoring ways to meet that need outside of the habit. It turns out that when a need is satisfied outside of a habit, the habit itself will have less pull. It didn't say it'll have zero pull, it'll have less. So once you have an idea of what the need is, ask, what are other ways I can try to meet this need? A way a lot of people experience this is the way the Bible describes it. This is the way the Bible describes this. To put off your old self, which belongs to the former manner of life and corrupted through deceitful desires, and to be renewed with the spirits of your minds. And to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. And see, the reality is that new self is available, but we have to put off the old habits, which means we need to be able to aim at healthy ways of meeting our healthy needs. All right, so I think that's going to be enough for today. Look, I hope at least one point of what we talked about today was just tremendously helpful to you or maybe to someone you love. And I hope that you will take some of these things to help you wander closer and closer to God. All right, I hope you guys have a great one, and we'll see you here next week.